Hello and welcome to round 13 of Pro Tour Born of the Gods. We're going to be watching our feature match area in the front of the feature match area. On the left of our screen, that's Jared Boettcher. This is his very first Pro Tour, playing an interesting deck. He's playing Ad Nauseam, and it's not Ad Nauseam Tendrils, you know, none of this vintage or legacy stuff. This is Ad Nauseam with Lightning Storm. He's up against Hall of Famer Frank Karsten. Now, Frank had a little bit of a rough start to this PT, but playing Affinity, very, very aggressive deck, he has rallied back and is in great position now. Both these players on 27 points, and this is kind of a win and in match, and we see classic Affinity type start here. Frank Karsten leads with a Springleaf Drum. It has been reprinted in Born of the Gods, the original version. And just a Temple of Deceit there from Jared Boettcher.
Now, to give you an idea of kind of what's going on in this match, Frank, the Affinity deck, basically tries to flood the board with a lot of artifacts, then play a card like Cranial Plating or Arcbound Ravager that allow them to turn those artifacts into damage. Frank's basically just going to be trying to deal as much damage as quick as he can. Jared is trying to assemble a combination of Angel's Grace, which basically says you can't lose this turn, and Ad Nauseam, which basically lets you draw a card and lose life equal to its mana cost any number of times that you want. Angel's Grace and Ad Nauseam mean he can draw his deck. Then he kills you with Lightning Storm, which deals you 3 damage plus 2 damage for each land that you discard to it.
Yeah, Lightning Storm, a very powerful spell in that if you've got enough cards in your hand, specifically enough lands to discard, you can just go from 0 to hero, the full 20 points in one go.
And that you usually have enough cards if you've drawn your entire deck. So,
Jared Boettcher at the moment, though, he's not done too much just yet. He's suspended a Lotus Bloom, so once all of those counters, currently 2 left on there, come off, he will have a Lotus that he can sacrifice for 3 mana of any color, and he's using Sleight of Hand just to fix his draws a little bit.
Yeah, so it looks like Jared actually has the combo in his hand. He's got Angel's Grace and Ad Nauseam. He just needs to be able to get to 6 mana, 2 of which are black, 1 of which is white, to be able to cast it. So that Lotus Bloom is going to almost get him there. We see from Frank's side a lot of the cards that matter, too. He's got 3 artifacts on the battlefield right now, plus the Arcbound Ravager itself. Cranial Plating in his hand, meaning that that is going to turn into an additional 5 damage at least. So Frank, has basically what he needs. It's a matter of, is he going to be able to race that Lotus Bloom? And
it's going to be tight. I mean, at least in game 1, basically, this is just a straight-up race. Who can get to their endgame faster? And while Jared's endgame is a little bit more complicated, both of these decks can get to their endgame really, really quite fast. Frank needs to do tons of damage as fast as possible, because this is not an Ad Nauseam deck that says, I'm going to flip 1 card, lose a little bit, decide if I want to flip some more. It's all or nothing for Boettcher's deck. When it's doing things right, it's just drawing its entire deck.
Now, looking at Jared's hand, he actually has a second Angel's Grace, which functions basically as a time walk, as a whole extra turn for Jared, because Frank is basically going to have to win through damage, and if he's attacking, Jared can just say, okay, I'm going to cast Angel's Grace the hard way, and I can't lose this turn.
Yeah, I mean, what Angel's Grace does is it basically means that if you would lose that turn, instead of going to 0 life, you just go to 1 life instead, and 1 is obviously just enough. So it's likely here, there's a Steambents in play for Boettcher, it's likely that he's going to fetch a source of white mana there, just so that even if he needs to cast a couple of Angel's Graces, he's got a permanent way of doing that, so he doesn't need to worry about using, say, the Lotus Bloom to do so.
Where I'm going to go ahead and take a look at Angel's Grace, because it's a little bit of a weird card. Basically a split second, too, so your opponent can't respond to it. But you can't lose, your opponents can't win, and you can't die. Very good with Ad Nauseam, also very good when you're being attacked for lethal damage. So.
Yeah, worth noting that that's damage that would reduce you to less than 1, reduces you to 1 instead. If there's something that causes you to lose life, you do still go to 0, but you don't lose the game for that exact turn. The next turn, all bets are off. It's all over.
Yeah, if you pass the turn, well, you're going to be at 0 life. You're still going to lose.
But there's a Mox Opal there from Frank Karsten. He's doing a bit of counting. That's never a good sign for the other side of the board when the Affinity deck starts doing maths. And Frank Karsten, with his PhD, among the better at maths in total. His PhD in a variation of game theory and resource allocation, pretty ideal for Magic deck building, which he is known for. And here we see a whole bunch of artifacts appearing on the board. A second Arcbound Ravager there. Immediately tapped a Springleaf Drum to cast Cranial Plating. Now the plating, that's an equipment that gives each creature extra power gives the creature equipped to it extra power equals the number of artifacts in play. And right now that's quite a few.
Yeah, what Frank was doing there was basically deciding, is it more resourceful for me to figure out if I can cast Cranial Plating and equip it? And he gets to attack this turn, but he doesn't deploy a bunch of extra artifacts to the battlefield. So what he determined was, no, it's actually better for me not to attack this turn, but to get both Cranial Plating and a second Arcbound Ravager on the battlefield to set up my other Cranial Plating as well as my Steel Overseer. Having two creatures means that both of those Springleaf Drums can produce mana potentially, and one can produce mana while still allowing Frank to attack.
Gemstone Mine there, a nice pickup for Jared, because that a land that just 3 times in the game can tap for mana of any color, and we can see that this is a fairly color-intensive deck. He's got white spells, he's got red spells, he's got black spells. Gemstone Mine will cost them all, but it'll only cost 3 of them.
So Jared has the Hallowed Fountain, which allows him to hard cast an Angel's Grace. Next turn, Lotus Bloom ticking down. He has 3 lands. He does have enough to cast his combo pieces. But Frank, on the other end, presenting a lot of damage right here, too. He's got Cranial Plate. He's got a Steel Overseer, and I believe he drew an Etched Champion.
That second Cranial Plating makes a huge difference in terms of the overall maths here. So immediately drops it into play. I think we can expect to see both copies of that equipment sitting on one or other of Frank's creatures, all on one Ravager, and I'm guessing that, well, there's going to be a big attack here. Let's add up exactly how big.
I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 artifacts, plus 1, so it's currently 17 power.
Frank thinking the exact same thing we are, and I think he can... No, normally you can sack Arcbound Ravager plus Modular to actually net +1 damage, but because there's 2 Cranial Platings, it effectively cancels out.
So Boettcher now on just 2, so he's nearly dead, but nearly dead is really not the same as dead.
Exceptionally different from dead. If that Glimmer Void were some sort of artifact land for Frank, or that he could activate to turn into an artifact, it might be a different story, but we see Jared right now has the combo.
Not seen that.
He may have found a way to lose there by accidentally looking at the top card, but no. Here we go.
Blue.
He's
Ad nauseam.
casting Ad Nauseam.
Sure.
Now we get to see his whole deck.
The whole deck. I'll let you look.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm going to be at an absurdly negative number.
An absurdly negative number.
I think we'll let Jared explain this, because I mean, I'm sure that Frank knows what's going on, but by the sounds of it, Jared's got a pretty good handle on explaining this. I'm guessing he's been doing this approximately 6 rounds so far.
We have seen players lose games that are quote-unquote unlosable by failing to operationalize their combo effectively. I've certainly done that when I was playing Elves in Berlin. I've seen Steve Sadin do that. I'm picking on people who I like right now. So, I mean, you know, there's value in making your opponent go through the motions just to make sure they can do it.
I mean,
1, 2, 3, 4.
I have 16 lands left.
No, just checking. 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, that should be more than enough.
That's 21 at 9.
Yep. And I just want to read this, how that works.
The good reading cards game.
so this is kind of the interesting bit, and it really shows off sort of the way that Frank thinks about the game, because
Okay.
basically
Yeah, that's crazy, right?
he's going,
Yep. Yep.
I'm going to learn exactly what your deck does this game. Can't beat it now. Might be able to beat it in the next 2.
Deep enough that Carson's got to read it.
Now, Phyrexian Unlife, basically, effectively, another Angel's Grace. It basically says you can't lose for having 0 life. Damage becomes poison. Ad nauseam, though, forces you to lose life, so you don't have to care about it. It basically lets you ad nauseam for your entire deck again.
So that's the end of game 1. We're going to have a couple of messages, and then we'll see if we can get a sneaky peek of another game before we go back to our main match.
Ultra Pro is the place to go for all your Magic accessories. With card sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, and portfolios showing off the best Magic art, Ultra Pro is the standard in safe storage. Visit ultrapro.com for more information. You've watched the Pro Tour. How about playing on the Pro Tour? Qualifiers for Pro Tour Journey into Nyx are going on now around the world, with winners earning an invitation and airfare to Atlanta this May. Visit wizards.com/PTQ for more information.
We just finished game one for Frank Karsten and Jared Boettcher, but we've had a whole bunch of games finish at almost exactly the same time. Hence, you get to see a little bit more of myself, Tim Willoughby, and Zach Hill with me in the booth. Just to let you know what's been going on in some of those other games, there has been a poison win as well. Christian Seibold won game one against Michael Hetrick with poison from his affinity deck. So that Inkmoth Nexus, possibly with a cranial plating, we've seen they're pretty powerful. Obviously, you don't need to do quite as much damage when it's infect damage, just 10 to end the game there. And Jacob Wilson, he's won his first game up against Raymond Tan. So there's lots of shuffling going on in our feature match area. And finally, we have Josh McLean up a game against Godenis Vidugaris. So lots and lots of shuffling. Josh McLean, he's again. We saw him in the video area earlier on, but he's now up against the wall a little bit on 27 points. Can't really afford to lose any more matches, but a game up against Godenis. We know he's a very, very good player. A great position to be in at this point in the day. Now, let's have a little think about sideboarding for this matchup between Frank and Jared Boettcher. What can Frank do?
Yeah, so looking at Frank's sideboard right now, I see two cards that really sort of spring to mind for me. The first is Thoughtseize, which is just really good against any deck that's trying to assemble two combo pieces. And the second card that stands out is Ancient Grudge. Now, Ancient Grudge, it's not as though the Ad Nauseam deck's an affinity deck, but its combo costs 6 mana of two kind of hard-to-cast colors. Got double black for Ad Nauseam, white for Angel's Grace. A lot of the way that the deck's able to do that is through Lotus Bloom and Pentad Prism. So Ancient Grudge can threaten Lotus Bloom on the upkeep, potentially before you're able to assemble 6 total mana of the right combination. You're not going to be able to play a land for a main phase. And it can get rid of Pentad Prism when it's on the battlefield. So I like Ancient Grudge for that reason. Thoughtseize seems totally incredible. The challenge is making sure you don't dilute your deck so much that you can't kill your opponent. But I think Etched Champion, not at its best here. Galvanic Blast, not incredible. Thoughtcast, not incredible. So I think that those are the swaps that you make.
Now we can see on screen here all 4 matches shuffling up. Just want to make absolutely clear, sort of quite how sort of neatly synchronized we've managed to get our feature match area, unintentionally, admittedly, here in round 13 of Pro Tour Born of the Gods. The interesting thing for me looking at the deck from Jared Boettcher is he's already in his main deck got a plan at least against the Thoughtseize idea, and it's kind of an interesting one. Do you want to talk us through that, Zach?
Against Thoughtseize, he's got a card called Conjurer's Bauble. It basically allows you to sack it to put any card from your hand on the bottom, from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. So a lot of the time when you're playing a deck with only one win condition, they can just Thoughtseize your win condition. But in this case, if Lightning Storm's taken away, he can Conjurer's Bauble that to the bottom of his deck after he's drawn his entire deck using Ad Nauseam. So the bottom of the deck's the top of his deck. He uses one of his Simian Spirit Guides to cast Conjurer's Bauble, then uses the other 3 to cast Lightning Storm. So it's clear that he's kind of thought through a lot of the things that can go wrong. The other thing he's thought through is how on earth to beat Affinity, because he has 3 copies of Hurkyl's Recall in his sideboard.
Wowzers.
Which basically return all artifacts a player controls to that player's hand. So talk about buying time. Between that and Angel's Grace, it's going to be very hard for Frank to simply attack his way toward victory here.
Don't worry if you're having trouble keeping up with this. We were looking through the deck list for a bit of time before this particular match came on, because it's a bit of a puzzle, this deck. It's like something you find in the back of the newspaper. We've got all of these bits. If you put them together just right, then we can do something really, really smart. And that's exactly what Jared has done in his deck design. It's a very, very smart bit of building here.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, and it's also a smart bit of just being able to cast your spells in the first place. Kind of a weird combinatorics problem. You have double red, you've got white, you've got double black. You have to cast the white and double black at the same turn, and then you also have a lot of 1-mana blue spells. So I think Gemstone Mine doing a lot of work here. Gemstone Caverns making an appearance. I think that was Tsuyoshi Fujita's invitational card that wasn't an invitational card, but sort of was.
Was that Unlucky Man's Paradise, right?
Unlucky Man's Paradise, exactly. So yeah, a really innovative deck that Boettcher put together, and it seems to be paying off.
Absolutely. I'm really, really excited to see exactly how that works. And it looks like Frank and Jared there sort of having a little chat as they shuffle up, sort of trying to figure out. I mean, this is Jared's first show, right? He's still kind of getting used to the motions of being on the Pro Tour. It's a big deal. Like, first Pro Tour, playing against a Hall of Famer late in the day, potentially still sort of in the running for top 8. And I mean, you don't want to be playing against someone like Frank Karsten at this point in the day, do you?
Well, I don't think you can. On the other hand, I don't think you want to be. I do think Jared's really equipped himself for this kind of environment. I mean, and this is we're not knocking on Jared for being a rookie. It's very hard to fly to another continent, try to get some rest, play 12 hours of Magic on day 1, 12 hours of Magic on day 2. But the advantage he has is he's playing a bunch of cards that probably no one else in the room even knows what they do.
Clearly, we've seen it,
Yeah, you saw Frank reading Unlife. So the advantage that you may not have due to being inexperienced, you have an advantage because your opponents aren't experienced against your deck. So I think he's able to mitigate some of that.
So it looks like we have got a match started, but this is not our main combo match. We're going to get a little sneaky peek. We've seen this deck just last round on the right-hand side of our screen. That is Living End being played by Michael Hetrick. On the other side, we have Christian Siebold. He's playing Affinity, which conveniently enough is what Frank Karsten's playing this round. So hopefully 2 decks that we're fairly familiar with, but 2 quite different plans. And here we get to see the power of Living End against creatures, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we're seeing Affinity on a mulligan, still nevertheless able to attack for, I believe, 3 damage this turn. Double mulligan for Christian, doesn't have a Cranial Plate, doesn't have an Arcbound Ravager, so not really where you want to be, and not really able to apply a whole lot of pressure. Hetrick has Living End in his hand, probably doesn't want to suspend it though, and you see him just cycling tons and tons of creatures.
Yeah, 1 Living End as soon as it happens is just going to be moderately bonkers because it's going to kill off everything that double mulligan has been able to achieve thus far and give Michael Hetrick an almost game-winning board immediately.
Now, one thing is that even if he is able to resolve a Living End, the only creature that can block flyers out of the graveyard is Pale Recluse. So if Siebold's able to deal enough damage, he might be able to sneak through the final few points with an Inkmoth or Blinkmoth Nexus, which of course probably aren't going to get killed by Living End unless it happens mid-combat due to a violent outburst.
So lots of moving parts in this matchup, and certainly one that I'm sure that both of them have done a reasonable amount of testing of. These both slightly better known decks than decks for the like of Jared Boettcher's Ad Nauseam deck. But by the looks of things are getting sort of sorted out on our main match now. I think that there may have been a mulligan from Frank Karsten looking for exactly the right cards he needs in the match, but it looks like they're probably just about ready that we might be able to switch across pretty shortly. And yeah, both players there just getting set up. And it looks like Jared Boettcher cannot wait to get his next game in. He's really enjoying playing this deck, even when there are starts like this one coming from Frank Karsten. That's turn 1, Blinkmoth Nexus, Springleaf Drum, free Memnite, free Mox Opal, tap the Springleaf Drum and the Memnite and the Mox Opal, make a Steel Overseer and pass. Not a bad mulligan.
No, not a bad mulligan at all. Really sick turn 1, but I mean, if you look at Jared, he has literally the exact cards that I think he wants to draw right here. He's got a turn 0 Lotus Bloom, he's got Hercule's Recall, he's got Ad Nauseam, and he's got Angel's Grace. Plus he's got a Scryland and a Serum Visions to dig him into more mana. So Jared has exactly the hand that he wants in this matchup.
And just for you Michael Hetrick fans out there, to let you know, he did just cast Living End, and we are immediately onto a game 3 in that match that we got a sneaky peek of. Master of Ethereum there from Frank Karsten. That pumps all of his artifact creatures and is itself just massive.
Yeah, that Master is unbelievable there. It allows him to attack for a lot of damage. He's going to activate his Steel Overseer at the end of the turn, and Frank is presenting a lot of damage. A very powerful mulligan hand, and Master, a card that a lot of Affinity players don't play. They're running more Etched Champions, but it's shining right here today.
And kind of the cool thing about Affinity, we saw how much Frank Karsten did on turn 1. Even though there's a Hercule Recall lurking in the future for him, he's going to be able to deploy quite a large proportion of the cards he's already got in play with not that much delay.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he will be starting from essentially square one, though. The only difference being an Inkmoth Nexus or a Blinkmoth Nexus. The remainder of his permanents are artifacts, and we see Jared there. 2 temples mean that he doesn't actually have 2 mana to Hurkyl's Recall. So something like a Cranial Plate here, I guess it doesn't resolve, but I mean, this is going to be a big turn for him.
Now, Frank can't realistically know quite what answers are coming from Boettcher's deck because he's got access to so many colors of mana that he could have any number of different things. So I don't think that he's going to aggressively use the Steel Overseer to get an extra points here, even though we know that it might be quite a good idea for him.
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, I see him activating Blinkmoth Nexus. That gives him an additional artifact. It also gives him an additional creature to put a counter on with Steel Overseer. And that means that if Hurkyl's Recall happens or anything like that happens, he can still play a mana source if he's able and just attack for 2 more, which, depending on how much damage he's able to deal here, might be all that matters, especially if Jared has to deal himself damage with a land next turn.
Double checking, I can't kill you this turn.
I'm pretty sure you can't, but I might have missed something.
Such a scary thing to hear from someone like Frank Karsten, who, you know, if there's a way, he'll find it.
Well, there's 7 artifacts. That Master of Ethereum at least to 8/8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I think he can deal like 13 damage.
Activate the Nexus.
Sure.
Put some more counters on everything.
Do you need more dice? I have dice.
I might need 1 more.
First,
2 if you just...
Yeah,
there you go. 2.
not a bad problem there.
We're going to need a bigger bow.
Yeah.
Then
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 total damage.
I don't actually check this. It is 10. I count 14. I have 8 artifacts, so this is a 10/10 creature. This is 3 plus 1 from the master.
Oh, plus 1 for the master. Yep, 14. So I go to 6.
Yes.
So not a bad third turn for Frank.
My plan is on the table.
Your plan might not stay on the table there, Frank, unfortunately.
What we know that Frank doesn't, knowledge is power. And he might lose his board to Hurkyl's, and next turn, again, Jared has the Angel's Grace. He has Ad Nauseam. He has exactly what he needs, and even has a Pact of Negation to protect it. But, you know, at 6, I mean, the Blinkmoth Nexus can deal some damage. It just may not be fast enough.
Oof.
Your pan no longer on the table.
Sorry, Jared, I got there first. Your joke's old hat now.
Tim, there's people copy you all the time. They don't even know it.
Some mana in response.
Okay, it's going to disappear still. Because it's upkeep.
No,
Oh, yeah.
everything goes back.
Yep.
Well, I mean, one thing that could have happened if that happened on the upkeep is if Frank had a Galvanic Blast, casting that for 4, playing a land, activating Blinkmoth Nexus, and attacking would have been 6 damage.
So
But
let's try
I mean,
again.
Frank does not, in fact, have a Galvanic Blast, but there are 2 in his main deck.
Memnite,
Yep.
Mox,
Yep.
Check it out.
drum.
Frank deploying the rest of his hand, but he really needs a Thoughtseize right here, or none of these permanents are going to matter very much when that Lotus Bloom enters the battlefield.
And we've got another result from one of the other tables. So Jacob Wilson has won 2 games to 0 over Raymond Tan. So Wilson just doesn't seem to know how to lose in this match. He's now at 33 points, 11 wins, and just perilously close to locking up a top 8.
Yeah, extremely close there. Basically leading the pack. Raymond Tan playing the Hexproof deck. Has been serving him well so far, but he picks up, what's his second loss? Sorry, his third loss.
Lots of counting here from Frank, but I think that ultimately for naught, Cyborg is down to just 5 life up against Michael Hetrick in the deciding game there. Oh, sorry, down to 5 cards. Oh, that's far worse.
Yeah.
Affinity, not necessarily a deck that mulligans particularly well because it's a deck that really wants to get critical mass of things.
Right, it wants to flood the board with permanents. And that's what we're seeing on this turn. I mean, Frank able to get most of his hand back, but you know, Jared basically just hoping that he's not going to get interacted with on that turn from Frank. Oh, wow, and another Hurkyl's Recall. Even if he didn't have the combo, would set Frank back even harder. But Jared basically, right at this point, making sure that he didn't side out his Lightning Storm.
Yeah, Frank's just saying, just show me.
1, 2,
Although,
4, 5, 6,
if
7,
Jared
9.
discards all of the lands, Frank could theoretically kick the Lightning Storm back, but that is not what happens here.
Yeah, if he somehow had 4 lands in hand, he might have been able to set something up there. But I think that in reality, it wasn't ever really happening. Jared Boettcher locks it up. That a relatively quick win for him, and one has to think that this is not necessarily a field that is ready for exactly the list that he's brought.
Well, I really like the way Jared's thinking about it. I mean, one of the best ways to interact with a deck like his is through hand disruption, things like Thoughtseize, things like Inquisition of Kozilek. But if you know Jund is going to be less popular because of the banning of Deathrite Shaman, and subsequently cards like Liliana, which ordinarily be very effective against you, get weaker, if not unplayable, that is the perfect time to play a deck that's soft to hand disruption, because all of the decks that play it aren't actually in the environment.
So we are now going to jump across to one of our other matches. We've seen a little bit of this matchup already. A bit of affinity on the left-hand side of our screen. That is Christian Seibold. He's up against Michael Hetrick, who was in our feature match area last round. This is the King of the Hill table, and both players on 30 points. The Living End deck of Michael Hetrick has not yet lost in Constructed, and Hetrick is just sort of cycling away, playing his regular game plan here.
Yeah, I mean, and again, all you want to do when you're Living End is get paired up against creature decks. The fact that not only do you put 10, 12, 14 power on the table, you just kill all of your opponent's creatures on the 3rd turn of the game. I mean, Wrath of God cost 4 mana, so you're saving mana on a ridiculous reanimation spell, as well as the ability to wipe your opponent's board. I mean, it's unbelievable how much raw power the Living End deck can bring to bear.
Of course, one interesting thing in this exact matchup is that Demonic Dread, Michael Hetrick can't profitably... well, I guess he can target things and he'll still get the Cascade because you can't sacrifice something in response. Is that correct?
That is correct. Now, a thing that could theoretically happen is that Seibold's only creatures are Etched Champions with protection from all colors, in which case Hetrick could never target them in the first place.
I mean, there is a Demonic Dread in Michael Hetrick's hand, which is obviously the first piece of the puzzle. Conveniently, it immediately finds the second piece.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Hetrick actually has Violent Outburst too, but if I were Seibold, I would immediately sack that Ravager, I think, contributing damage to those Etched Champions to prevent them from Living End. Now, a thing that he can do is sack them all in response so that they're in the graveyard when Living End resolves. But, I mean, a thing that potentially is even more powerful is not letting him even cast Demonic Dread in the first place and continuing to beat down with Etched Champions.
I don't know. I mean, it feels to me like if you just sack all of your guys in response and then bring everything back, then at least you've not lost your guys. I mean, we'll ignore the fact that it does mean Michael Hetrick gets like 3 or 4 free guys. Like, it's still pretty good. But there's an extra land in play there for Seibold, who also has an Inkmoth Nexus. Now, an interesting one that did win him game 1 with poison damage. The fact that it flies and is only a creature when you want it to be, both very, very powerful against Living End, because while Living End has the likes of Deadshot Minotaur to kill flying creatures, chances are the times that the Minotaur is coming into play are not the times that the Nexus is really causing a problem.
Right. I mean, there are times like this where it could happen. I guess the Inkmoth Nexus is going to die to Living End anyway if Hetrick chooses to Violent Outburst here. I mean, and even if Seibold sacks everything to Ravager, it resets the Ravager counters, it fogs for a turn, essentially, and most importantly, it brings back Pale Recluse, a pair of Deadshot Minotaurs, and I believe that's a Street Wraith. It might be an Architect's of Will.
I think that's a fetch land in the graveyard.
That's a fetch land?
I think it's just two Deadshot Minotaurs and a Pale Recluse.
Just 10 power worth of creatures. One of whom
He's on 20. That's loads of time.
So yeah, Hetrick, I think, deciding here whether he wants to pull the trigger or whether he wants to cycle Architects.
The other thing that's going on, of course, is that there's a Spell Pierce in Christian Seibold's hand. So even when that Living End gets cascaded into, he's not got enough mana up to pay for the Spell Pierce.
Yeah, and the living end is the Spell Pierce is absolutely huge here. The Glimmer Post or Glimmer Void, able to actually cast it. I was looking at the Springleaf Drum, saying, okay, well, he doesn't have blue mana, but Glimmer Void certainly fulfills that role admirably, and that's going to buy Cybold an entire turn at least.
Wow. So that was a Simian Spirit Guide being removed from the game for 1 extra mana, paying for the Spell Pierce. Now Cybold is left going, well, maybe I will sacrifice a few bits and pieces.
And that explains very well why Hetrick waited until the 4th turn when he could have cast Living End on the previous turn. He wanted to be able to have 2 extra mana to play around a card like Spell Pierce.
Cybold here trying to work out a way of ending up with a bunch of counters on his Nexus. That's not going to work, I don't think. I was under the impression he'd activated that.
Yeah, I also was under the impression that he would have had to have activated it if it was a creature. Okay, so
yeah, we figured it out.
We're performing the operations correctly, even if they don't necessarily wind up mattering all that much.
So all of a sudden, the board a little bit closer to parity. I mean, Cybold still has 4 points of unblockable damage coming through each turn, and that Arcbound Ravager that can potentially move a few more over there. But at least now Hetrick has a good old mix of creatures in play.
Yeah, I mean, one thing he could theoretically do after Cybold had reset, sacked all of his permanents to Ravager and got the back is just Living End again and deplete them. But, you don't want to get rid of your 10 power worth of creatures. So Living Ending another time, kind of comboing off a second time, not really a major option for Hetrick right here. He needs to figure out how to win with his existing board, plus anything else that he can contribute to it. I mean, Demonic Dread actually not the worst as target creature can't block against that Arcbound Ravager, but the Etched Champion's going to do a decent job of holding off Pale Recluse and Deadshot Minotaur as we see Hetrick here trying to stack his graveyard a second time.
Stack his graveyard and dig. I mean, we don't know exactly what he brought in from the sideboard. I'm guessing there's an Ingot Chewer or 2 knocking about somewhere in his list.
Yeah, he has 4 copies of Ingot Chewer in his sideboard, so those would prove extremely powerful here, both to get rid of that Ravager and potentially to just lower Cybold's artifact count. But with that indestructible Darksteel Citadel plus the 2 Etched Champions themselves, yeah, those Etched Champions are going to have protection from all colors for a long time coming.
They're best of buds. They're helping each other out, right?
Right. I mean, the thing that Cybold can't put together is if he commits those Etched Champions to attacking, he's going to get hit back for more damage. So if I'm Hetrick here, I think I just try to either push through what damage I can, knowing 2 creatures are going to get blocked, or just try to set up a second Living End for, even more.
I think it's going to be really difficult to set up a Living End here just because Ravager can mean that Living Ends don't leave Hetrick ahead.
Right. I mean, you've got to have enough cyclers in the graveyard, which currently 2 Architects of Will aren't, to be able to just radically outpace Cybold's permanence. Because, I mean, Cybold was behind on that Living End. Ravager was reset and so forth, and the champions are going to have to play at least something of a defensive role. But you're right that this game is not ending anytime soon, at least given what's already on the board.
And Michael Hetrick, a very patient player, it must be said. He doesn't need to... I think one of the things that can be quite easy to do with a lot of combo decks, which is essentially this is to say, I'm going to win the game as fast as I possibly can. And while that's a noble goal, and it feels very good to win the game on the very first turn that you can, one of the things that we see from a lot of pro players with a lot of different combo decks is you just need to win the game. Like, you don't get extra points for winning really, really fast. So it's about going, this is the right time and the right way to do it that means that I have the best chance of winning. And by the looks of it here, Michael is quite happy to take the time. A Thoughtseize takes away his Demonic Dread, but while he doesn't have loads of stuff in hand, he's got a little bit of time to figure out exactly what he needs to do to win. Yeah,
I mean, I think your point about taking a while is exactly what's going on right here. I remember talking with Matthias Hunt yesterday, and he said one of the assets of playing with his Amulet of Vigor deck as much as he had played it was that he knew when the plan was just to wait, play a bunch of Karus and hard cast Primeval Titans, and then with a combination of those and Summoner's Packs, just win the hard way without using much acceleration at all. I think this is yet another case of that on Hetrick's side, but when now all of a sudden we see Cybold getting very aggressive right now.
Yeah, Cybold's seen Hetrick's hand. He knows that there's not a whole lot more going on in that hand, and he's saying, I think that I can win this race.
Yeah, taking the Demonic Dread means that Hetrick can't set up another living end and punish Cybold for devoting so many counters to that Arcbound Ravager. So Cybold threatening 7 damage here with Arcbound Ravager. Hetrick can definitely block with Minotaur, but falling to 3, that means that those Etched champions are lethal next turn if Cybold has another artifact. Oh. But no, I guess that is not what happened.
Well, basically, he didn't have the extra artifact. So
okay.
he was threatening to have the extra artifact, at which point it would work out that both of his Etched champions were protection from all colors. He did not have that. He was not able to cast an additional artifact. So once that Arcbound Ravager died, while the Etched champions were bigger, he only had 2 artifacts left.
I don't think that's what, because can't he sack the Arcbound Ravager to one of the Etched champions that's not blocked for the remaining 3 damage? I think that's what happened.
Possibly. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I think what happens is the Arcbound Ravager gets blocked. Affinity player says, that's nice, and then moves those counters over to one of the creatures that isn't blocked, which is able to deal Hetrick the final points of damage.
Absolutely, you're totally right. And we've jumped across to another match now, not one that we've actually seen a whole lot of just yet. This is Godenis Vidaguris on the left-hand side of our screen. He's playing Storm up against Josh McClain. Now, Josh is playing Melirapod. Explain us a little bit about that deck, Zach, because it's kind of a tricky one.
Yeah, so the idea with Melirapod is that you want to get Melira, Sylvok Outcast onto the battlefield. That says -1/-1/-1 counters can't be placed on permanents. So you set up a way to sacrifice a creature, and then a persist creature like Murderous Redcap or Kitchen Finks that come back with -1/-1 counters. So basically they can't. So instead of failing to go away the second time they die, which is what the mechanic says, they just stick around forever and you can sack them as much as you want. That allows you to gain infinite life or an arbitrarily large number of life with Kitchen Finks, or deal an arbitrarily large amount of damage with Murderous Redcap.
Now it looks like here that arbitrary large amount of damage certainly not happening anytime soon, because the Storm deck, which we've seen a fair amount of in the feature match area from Gaudenis, is setting up quite a reasonable board wipe here. A defensive grape shot, if you will, killing off both the Voice of Resurgence token and an Eternal Witness, and forcing that Murderous Redcap to persist, so it has now got a -1/-1 counter.
Yeah, we see, a lot of really powerful cards in Gaudenis' graveyard. Hard to see exactly what every single one of them are. He is at 1 life. The persist from Murderous Redcap, theoretically a lot more powerful if that 1 more counter wasn't there. And Gaudenis, I think, trying to combo out of his graveyard with a Past in Flames right now.
So, not a huge amount of work to be done by
that was
McClain.
a Desperate Ravings, my fault.
So Kitchen Finks and a Birds of Paradise there from what looks to be an all-foil version of the Melirapod deck from Josh McClain. He just desperately needs to find a way of sneaking through that final point, and just casting creatures and attacking might well be the way.
Gaudenis able to set up a lot right here with Goblin Electromancer and a lot of mana in play.
Thought Scour there, putting cards in the graveyard. He's drawn a Pyromancer's Ascension, which potentially is fairly easy to power up with so many cards in the graveyard, but not loads of cards in hand for Gaudenis.
Yeah, the question here is simply how he's going to stay alive. I think he's got to block with both those Electromancers and hope to string something together next turn with Pyromancer Ascension.
And here comes the attack from Josh McClain. Just the Kitchen Finks coming in. They are, well, half trading, I suppose, with a Goblin Electromancer, killing it off and then persisting back. So Josh is going to be gaining a bit of life, which he immediately spends when he casts Thoughtseize, taking their, it looked like a
Pyromancer Ascension.
Pyromancer Ascension for Gaudenis. So Gaudenis drawing pretty thin, it must be said.
Right, so he's going to look with Thought Scour. Mills a Past in Flames, which might just be enough. He's got... Did he get a land as his card? If he flashes back Past in Flames for 3 due to Electromancer, just 1 ritual could set off his entire graveyard.
So
there we go.
Here comes a ritual.
That is what he has in his hand. He's able to turn 1 red mana into 3 red mana with that, I believe it's Pyretic Ritual.
That looks like the one, yeah. Electromancer there, making it cost 1 rather than 2. A pretty big upgrade, it must be said.
Yeah, milling that Past in Flames is going to be absolutely huge here, because once he's able to flash that back, we at the very least know that he has several rituals and grape shots. So if nothing else, he's going to be able to wipe McLean's board and buy himself some time. Might be able to get further ahead from that if he has a Manamorphose in his graveyard.
Yeah, we might see whether or not we can just get GoDennis to move his graveyard down a bit so we can see all of it, because there's lots of stuff going on, including a couple of Manamorphose in his graveyard there.
Yeah, his graveyard basically his hand right here. Yeah, I think he's saying he's... Oh, so basically, my graveyard's going to kill you, and that's what's up.
Yeah, like, I guess that at this point, there's so much stuff in the graveyard, it wasn't even possible to really fit it all on the table neatly. He was able to kind of point out that he was going to go lots and lots of rituals, and just make it all happen in one big go.
Right, I mean, we've already seen the grape shot. He had tons of spells in his yard, and Electromancer meant that his rituals produce 3, his Manamorphose gains him both mana and cards. I think the assumption is, okay, you're going to be able to cast all that. It's going to be very bad for me. Let's go to game 3.
Yeah, so this now squared up match, both these players on 27 points, so they don't really have any losses left to give, and we're going to get a chance to see the full extent of another sort of interesting combo race. The cool thing about the Meliropod deck, of course, being that while it's a combo deck that can gain a whole ton of life, it can do all sorts of crazy clever things, it can also just beat down if it absolutely has to. Now, realistically, probably not enough time to go on the beatdown plan here, but by having a combo kill, like, life totals are kind of just sort of an interesting bit of salt and pepper on what's the real story of the game, which is how close has either player got to their combo.
Right. I mean, and the times that's going to come up a lot, I think, are if GoDennis is able to resolve Blood Moon. I mean, a lot of non-basic lands from the pod deck, you know, Birds of Paradise and Noble Hierarch make that plan a little bit worse. But if you can contain those with Grape Shot, it's going to be very hard for the Birthing Pod deck to cast a single spell. I think it has 3 forests and 1 swamp, period. To assemble its combo. I don't know if GoDennis thinks it's worth it to bring it in. I do know that Josh wants to bring in 4 copies of Thoughtseize. Very, very powerful against the Storm deck. He's also got a Sin Collector. He's got a Harmonic Sliver, which even though it's a 3-mana 1/1, could blow up a Pyromancer Ascension, which could buy Josh a lot of time.
Now, speaking of time, it looks like they were pretty much in a hurry to keep this match going. We've already seen Josh McLean kicking it off with a Razor Edge Thicket into Birds of Paradise. That'll accelerate him a little bit, the birds tapping for mana of any color. While on the other side of the board, a Serum Visions for GoDennis. He gets to draw a card, then scry 2.
Yeah, Josh McLean ahead on mana, ahead on tempo right here, not ahead on cards. GoDennis trying to just, again, he's got a lot of cantrips right here, so he needs blue mana to be able to turn those into a loaded graveyard and a bunch of rituals. Try to get a Pyromancer Ascension on the board as soon as possible. McLean has Thoughtseize, has Chord of Calling, but Chord of Calling is going to take at least a couple of turns before it turns into anything useful right now.
And that there are Ranger Eos on the pickup there for Josh McLean. Not something you can cast just yet. The priority is to stop GoDennis get the really fast start. So there's a Thoughtseize. Let's see what we got. So there's a Grape Shot. That'll kill people. A Desperate Ravings. That'll help him draw some more cards. Then a couple of lands, a Sleight of Hand, and a Thought Scour. 2 Thought Scours, sorry. So none of his actual win conditions and no sort of big mana, but lots of ways of finding them.
Yeah, not a really great hand to cast Thoughtseize into. The Thought Scours and Sleight of Hand are largely replaceable. Desperate Ravings is even better when it's in the graveyard than when it's in your hand. I think you take Grape Shot here to make sure that your Bird of Paradise stays alive and make sure he can't wipe your board once you begin to deploy threats. But you're not really happy with that Thoughtseize. You want to take something like an Empty the Warrens if your opponent has it, or something like a Pyromancer Ascension.
So he does take the Sleight of Hand then. That's kind of interesting, because I think I'm with you that I'd want to be keeping that Birds of Paradise around. But I guess that realistically he knows that GoDennis has to kill him, and burning an early Grape Shot just to sort of slow him down is possibly not the most efficient use of resources anyway.
That certainly makes sense. And Sleight of Hand digs gives you more options for what to take than Thought Scour does. The other thing is if you take Thought Scour, then your opponent draws Pyromancer Ascension. The Thought Scour is already in the graveyard anyway, making your second Thought Scour trigger Pyromancer Ascension. So definitely can understand why you'd want to take the sleight of hand. You want to prevent Godenis from drawing into anything particularly insane here. Still, double Thought Scour means he's going to, and Desperate Ravings means he's going to be able to replace that hand.
Now, this is interesting because there's immediately a Khazali Pride Mage down for Josh McClain, and right after, right on time, along comes Pyromancer Ascension. So that the perfect answer really to the powerful enchantment. It's a 2/2 with Exalted, so a perfectly fine attacker, but then if the Pyromancer Ascension comes down, before it gets a chance to start making spells get copied, that Pride Mage can just you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to get rid of the enchantment.
You know, I don't hate just playing Pyromancer Ascension out here anyway and kind of obligating your opponent to keep a mana open at all times this early in the game, or alternatively, blow it up with Pride Mage, which, you know, removes his pressure from the table. But looks like Godenis is going to prioritize casting Thought Scours and setting up his graveyard.
Yeah, and it does mean that there's a much better chance of getting a Pyromancer Ascension live super fast. And there is the possibility of, if you get late in the game enough, get enough mana available to kind of cast, trigger, and use a Pyromancer Ascension before the Pride Mage really gets a chance to do much, or in response to the Pride Mage activation.
Yeah, and that's really, yeah, exactly. You can respond to that by being able to go off. You can also just try and hope your opponent taps down low, doesn't have a mana available, and try to use Ascension all in one turn. The downside of that strategy is that you just don't have an abundance of mana right now, and you're under a lot of pressure. We see Viscera Seer, that's a part of the combo, Noble Hierarch, and an attack for Khazali Pride Mage, really dealing a lot to Godenis, but it does look like McClain is tapped out right now. So theoretically, Pyromancer Ascension could turn on if Godenis is able to fill it up.
I think he's a little short on rituals to kind of keep everything going. The ritual effects all being ones that generate more mana than they cost, so that he doesn't run out of mana in his big combo turn. In the meantime, Godenis can see that with Viscera Seer having been fetched with Ranger of Eos, Josh McClain one step closer to his combo, because Viscera Seer, 1/1 for black, lets you sacrifice a creature to scry 1. And to be honest, the scrying, while lovely, is not the main thing here. It's a cheap way of sacrificing creatures, which once you've got Malira and, say, a Murderous Redcap, is a combo to deal as much damage as you want to deal.
Absolutely. I mean, it is the scry does help to draw into those combo pieces. I think what Godenis wants to set up here, and he drew a Lightning Bolt, which is very powerful right now. He could also Manamorphose into... Desperate Ravings is not Desperate Ritual, but he could Manamorphose into another spell and just cast Grape Shot for 3, trying to kill Bird of Paradise and get that Khazali Pride Mage off the table. But now that he has Bolt, I think he can just Bolt the Pride Mage, play a Pyromancer Ascension, and threaten a win next turn.
It looks like Go wants to go for it. He's cast his Manamorphose to draw a card. He's found a ritual.
Right, and this is, I think, the Grape Shot line that we were talking about. Either Grape Shotting Khazali and the Bird, trying to set up an even bigger Grape Shot for the entire board. Godenis has a lot of options here. Not likely that what he's going to do is going to win him the entire game, but it's going to put him in a significantly better board position right now than he would be in otherwise.
There's the Lightning Bolt, and there's a Pyromancer Ascension. So basically he's saying, I've got a whole mess of different types of cards in my graveyard. I've got a Pyromancer Ascension in play with a good way of getting rid of it. I'm going to threaten to win next turn, and I don't think that you're going to be able to do much about it.
Yeah, Desperate Raving solid. Grape Shot means that he can still affect the board if McClain deploys that Viscera Seer and that Noble Hierarch, both 1 toughness creatures that bite the dust to Grape Shot. Vidigerus, now that he's not under pressure, also has the option of just setting up his hand more effectively with Desperate Ravings. McClain, on the other hand, still can Court of Calling for a combo piece. He's got Viscera Seer. It's trivially easy for him to get Malira. He just needs to put together a Persist outlet, which he currently does not have. Finally, just playing Gavany Township and making his creatures huge, not the worst play in the world either.
So it's a world of one drops led by Ranger of Eos for Josh McClain, Noble Hierarch, Birds of Paradise, and that Viscera Seer we've been talking so much about, but not quite presenting the sort of clock that he needs to force GoDennis to do something here, I don't think.
Yeah, and again, I mean, with a graveyard that size and a Pyromancer Ascension on the table, you've always got to be afraid that you're just in danger of losing the game if you're Josh. Having that Kasali Pride Mage hit the bin is a huge boon for GoDennis. That said, GoDennis' current hand not quite capable of winning the game. I think he needs to risk it with that Desperate Ravings and see what he can draw into.
Yeah, Cheven Reef, really not the draw that he was looking for there. Conveniently, though, the red-blue Storm deck, it doesn't need to rely on just the one draw each turn. It has plenty of other ways of getting extra cards.
And I mean, Shivan Reef at least gives him access to 2 mana this turn. A lot of the important spells in the deck, the Rituals, Manamorphos, more Desperate Ravings, more Pyromancers, cost 2. So, you know, Shivan Reef at least live here as a draw.
And Desperate Ravings getting rid of another draw spell, but let's see. Oh, there is a Gataxin Probe. Now, this is a really nice one for Viduguris here because it means that he gets a chance to really understand what he's up against.
Yeah, and understand how much time he has. On the other end, I think if he goes to 10, he might be facing something close to lethal next turn. That's 4, assuming a Gavany Township activation, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points of damage if Josh just turns all his creatures sideways. So GoDennis doesn't have infinite amounts of life to work with.
Especially if at the end of turn, Josh McClain uses that Quarter Calling just to get a dude.
Right. Yeah, so you're right. If Josh is able to draw an extra land to activate Gavany Township, or no, he's got Verdant Catacombs, so he is quietly presenting lethal damage right here. And unless this Grave Shot puts an end to all that craziness.
3 copies. Order them, so this one resolves first, followed by that one, followed by that one.
So he's targeting the Viscera Seer first in case, so that if that resolves, Josh can't sacrifice his other creatures for Scry. It's probably not going to matter because he's just going to do everything he needs to do in response. But still, I mean, we knew that GoDennis was setting up that Grape Shot
this
play.
is kind of nifty. So that's an Orzhov Pontiff. Now, there's 2 abilities on that. The first one's the important one right here. When it comes into play, it can either give all creatures you control +1/+1, or it can give all creatures your opponent control -1/-1. So he gets to make all of his creatures bigger, so they're all going to survive that Grape Shot. On top of which, of course, it's a creature in play to set up for more attacks the following turn. That a huge pickup from Josh McClain.
This is an absolutely unbelievably powerful Orzhov Pontiff right here. I think it's probably in the deck as a defense measure against Empty the Warrens, but it is going to represent, I believe, lethal damage right here from that Verdant Catacombs and Gavany Township, meaning that I think he's attacking for exactly the 10 damage he needs right now.
And
yeah, 1, I think it's actually
they're doing a little counting just to make sure.
3, 4, 5, 6, 10.
Going in for Exacties.
What
and
an
there's the handshake.
What an incredible Orzhov Pontiff. You know, you don't put that in your deck thinking, well, when my opponent Grape Shots me, I'm probably going to Court of Calling it out in response to save all 3 of my creatures. But a kind of atypical use of the card, really resourceful thinking from Josh right there, and that's what won him the game.
I mean, realistically, do you think that there's a way that, like, had GoDennis known about it, could he have realistically played around that?
I think you can direct them more to single target to make sure you're at least not facing down lethal. So you can put 2 copies at Viscera Seer, split them up 2 and 1, something of that nature, and at least make sure not to die. But, you know, I don't think that GoDennis was playing around Cord into Orzhov Pontiff.
Yeah, I mean, Court of Calling on its own, kind of a tricky card to play around, right? It's an instant, it can fetch any number of different things, and we know that the Melirapod deck plays just a whole mess of different creatures, so depending on the exact build, it could have been any one of a number of different bits and pieces, but That option certainly worked for Josh McClain.
Well, that is one of the tricky things about playing against decks like Pod. Because of Birthing Pod and Chord of Calling, you don't just have to play against the cards that you see and the cards you think you're in your opponent's hand. You have to kind of play against their entire library, too. You know, does my opponent have Shriekmaw in addition to Necrotol? Well, if he does, then I need to prioritize this because all my creatures are going to die. I mean, it's kind of insane, and that's a big advantage of playing a deck like Pod.
And that one of the reasons that preparation for this Pro Tour and getting an idea of exactly what sort of lists are doing well, what sort of lists people are playing is so, so important, because those tiny little details can be the difference between making top 8 of a Pro Tour and not.
Well, and sometimes you just aren't going to know, right? I mean, the different pod lists play different creatures. Some are in the main deck, some are in the sideboard. So at a certain level, it's kind of just essentially random. But the other piece of the puzzle is your opponent playing well enough to understand what options are available in the first place. So a really impressive win, I think, by Josh.
Now, we can speculate all we like about exactly how to play the pod deck as best as possible. I think the best person to speak to is Josh McClain himself. And if we go down to the feature match area, we have Marcel Sutcliffe ready to do exactly that.
Hey guys, welcome down to the feature match area. Marcel Sutcliffe here with Josh McClain, who just won. Wow, that was a really exciting finish. Josh, why don't you walk us through the last couple of turns there?
Well, it was very close. Like, I thought seized him, and so I knew his hand. I knew he couldn't kill me for sure. So I just had to hope that he didn't draw Pass in Flames there. I had the Chord of Calling, and I could play it, so I could chord for 3 at any point. I know the deck doesn't play any counter magic, so I could wait. And if he can't turn his Pyromancer Ascension on, I don't have to get Harmonic Sliver. So that was my plan. My plan was if he puts a counter on Pyromancer Ascension and then triggers the second counter, I was going to chord and get a Harmonic Sliver to kill that. But if he wasn't able to activate it, I wanted to end of turn chord for an Eternal Witness to bring back the Chord of Calling, and then just have more pressure. Then I could kill him with Township if he tapped out or whatever. But as it turned out, he went to Grape Shot my team, and I left in Orzhov Pontiff because I know sometimes they have the Empty the Warrens. So I left that in, and then as it turned out, it was really good to pump my team to save it from the Grape Shot, and then I could kill him with the land. Actually, I didn't need the land. I could have sacked my Orzhov Pontiff, haunted a guy, and then sacked that guy to pump my team too. So.
Yeah, because I got to say, watching it was pretty thrilling when that Orzhov Pontiff came down. It was like, wow. Now, talk to us a little bit about how it's going for you for the tournament overall. You have 3 losses right now?
Yep, I have 3 losses. I am 5-1 limited, so I have 2 constructed losses. Just actually a lot different. I expected to maybe 4-2 or 3-3 limited and then do really well in constructed. So I'm really glad I did well in limited. And then.
So a few more rounds here in Modern with your pod deck. This is your comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure. I play the deck a lot. I have hundreds and hundreds of games with the deck. So.
Well, good luck into the future here for Team Face-to-Face games.
Thank you very much.
All right, for us, it's back to the booth.
That there, Josh McClain, good game on Twitter and a good game in the feature match area. Really, really impressive. There were a couple of lines there that we hadn't quite picked out, and I think just goes to show quite how complicated that Melira pod deck is. A lot of complicated decks in the feature match area.
Yeah, I mean, there really are. And again, stuff like that. I mean, we're sitting here commentating. You're like, okay, well, if I look at the hand, I look at the deck, I have a pretty good idea what's going on. But just knowing that you have access to 1 Harmonic Sliver means that at any point, you're like, okay, well, I can chord that out if this happens, this happens. I mean, again, just really solid, tight play from Josh there.
And all the tight plays done from our feature match area now, but we are able to send you back to the news desk where Rich Hagan is able to give you a couple of details as to how the tournament's going in total. Back over there.
All right, thanks very much, Tim. Lots to get through. So how about this? Brian David Marshall, Michael Hetrick, Deck Tech, now.